So welcome everyone. So I'm Liz Heyer. I'm a Web Applications Development Manager at Garmin. I'm going to talk to you today about Scrum in the enterprise and making it work with distributed teams. So a little bit about me. I've been in web development over 14 years. Among other things, I'm a JIRA administrator. I'm a Scrum Master. Our web development team at Garmin right now has about 55 developers, and they're split between 2 different countries. We have 6 Scrum teams right now that are made up of people from both of those countries. And Garmin has offices in 62 different places around the globe. So when you have a company that's big like Garmin and you have so many offices, it's very rare that everyone involved in the project is in the same office. So when people are spread out, it can cause a lot of different problems. So first, project knowledge is scattered. So you may have a developer in one country, a business owner in another country, and a QA person in yet a different country. So how do you get information back and forth between those people? There can be a lot of delays, especially if they're in significantly different time zones. Opportunities to collaborate are very limited. So probably most of you don't know this, but Garmin's headquarters is located in Kansas City. So 2/3 of our development staff is located in Kansas City. The other third is located in Romania. So when we come in the office at 8 o'clock in the morning in Kansas City, it's already 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Romania. So we have about an hour, maybe 2 hours that we overlap. If you add into that a business owner that's maybe in Australia or Taiwan, there's very, very little overlap when everyone's working at the same time. And standard collaboration tools just don't work. You can't get everyone around a whiteboard to draw things out. You can't write little notes on napkins. And you can't use sticky notes to plan out your work for the week. When you have people that are spread out, you can't use those basic collaboration tools. So when you have those challenges, how can you build an effective development team? So at Garmin, we've decided that it takes 3 things. It takes the right process, the right people, and the right tools. So for the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to walk you through our recipe for those effective teams. So first, let's talk about process. No one groaned, so that's good. I view process kind of like traffic laws. I don't like them. I grumble about them a lot, but kind of secretly glad they're there. So we adopted Scrum about 3 years ago at Garmin. So if you're not familiar with Scrum, it's an iterative development process. You start by building your product backlog. That's your features and requirements that you need to build whatever product that you're building. And you prioritize those based on the value they give back to the business. Once you have that product backlog, your Scrum team attacks that backlog in short time-boxed increments called sprints. We use 2-week sprints at Garmin. So at the beginning of each sprint, the team gets together for their planning session. They look at all the candidate stories for that sprint. They discuss it. They design it. They talk about what kind of data they'll need, what kind of testing they'll need, and they estimate it using points based on how much effort the team thinks it's going to take them to complete that story. Once planning's over, they start implementation. Every day they meet for their daily Scrum. It's 15 minutes where they can get together, talk about what they accomplished, what they plan to do next, and if they have any blockers. So when you have development teams spread out all around the world, that Scrum is really important because it gives your team a constant, dedicated 15 minutes every day where they know that they can talk to each other, collaborate, and get their questions answered. At the end of every sprint, we have the sprint demo. That's where the team demos to the stakeholders what they've completed that sprint. It allows the development team to get instant feedback from their business owners. So are they building the right thing? Do they want anything changed, added? And we can take that information and feed it right back to the backlog. The last event in the sprint is the retrospective. So the Scrum team gets together for 30 minutes. They talk about what they did well, what they didn't do so well or what slowed them down, and what changes they want to make in the next sprint to make them more effective and more efficient. So if you've ever tried to implement Scrum at your place of business, you may have heard a few of these questions before. So let's talk about the first one and probably the hardest one. When will you be done? So in every business, every project you've ever done, the first question people ask you, so when are you going to be done? I need a date. So at Garmin, we manufacture things. So a lot of our projects are tied to launch dates of products, which means it's not very movable. So how do we get to a date to know if our project's going to be done on time? First, once we have our product backlog, we do a complete estimation session with our team. They look through the entire backlog, and they do a small, medium, large, or unknown on every story in the backlog. If it's a small effort, we'll probably give it a 2. If it's medium, probably 5 points. If it's large, maybe 8, 13 points. If it's unknown, meaning we have no idea how we're going to implement it, we have no idea what it's going to involve, we'll just say 20 points. And that gives us our initial size of the project. Then we work with our business to come up with our minimum viable product, or MVP. What's the minimum amount of features required to launch that product? That gives us our initial points that we need to shoot for our launch date. Once the team establishes a velocity, it could take a couple sprints, we can then project when we think we'll have finished that number of points for our MVP. It gives us our initial date. If, as happens to me a lot, you're given a date, hey, we've got a product announcement going on at CES, so we need you done by January 1st. We can then say, we can work backwards. So if we know we need to complete this many points by January 1st, how many points are we going to have to burn every sprint to reach that? Then I can construct our teams appropriately. Am I going to need 6 developers, or am I going to need 3? How many QA people am I going to need for that? And so on. Once we get our teams going, we need to make sure that we keep managing our scope. Otherwise, we could get to the end and still miss our date. So as your scope changes, which it will constantly, you got to look out how many bugs are being reported. Were your initial estimates way off? Is the business changing their mind? Or are they adding features, taking them away? So you need to make sure you're constantly monitoring that scope. And we do that with burn-up charts. So this is an actual burn-up chart from one of our projects. It's pretty simple. So you can see some of the milestones we need to hit, what the scope is for each of those milestones. The dotted line is what we have said is our velocity we should be hitting if we want to make our date, and the solid blue line is what our actual velocity is. So this team was doing a pretty good job. If the solid blue line was falling below the dotted line, then I'm going to need to take some action, either add more developers, try to find out why the team is falling behind. Maybe they have some blockers, or maybe they have some environment issues that's slowing them down. So we need to find out what we need to do to get that blue line back up above the dotted line. So another question you probably hear a lot, where are your requirements document? That's a really easy one to answer. In Scrum, your stories are your requirements. So your requirements are going to constantly change, they're going to evolve, and they should, right? That's one of the benefits of Scrum. So you may have to get your business owners used to the idea that they're not going to have this big Word document to look at. They need to be comfortable going into JIRA or wherever you're monitoring your stories, being able to look and find the information they need. So your business stakeholders aren't going to be the only ones that have a few challenges. Developers have a hard time converting to Scrum as well. So the 2 biggest complaints I hear from developers is about code reviews and design documents. So if you're coming from a waterfall shop converting to Scrum, code reviews are usually taking days. Maybe they were used to sitting in a conference room, putting a lot of code up on the screen, and reviewing it for a long time. With Scrum, you can't do that, especially when you have teams that are separated. You need to have a way to help them keep those stories moving, so you want those code reviews done in hours. Right, design documents. A lot of people think you don't design in Scrum, but you do. When we're initializing a project, we'll sit down, we'll do a basic architectural diagram, what are the major pieces of the project, and what are some of the interaction points. Then we design as we go. So when we're getting ready to implement a feature, we'll probably have a spike 1 or 2 sprints ahead of time, and we'll design that feature out. And we'll document it in Confluence, which gives us a living design document. All right, so why does Scrum work for us? And so Scrum really provides clarity across the team. Regardless of where you're located or what your role in the project is, you can easily see what's already done, what's coming up next, and where things are as far as priority goes. So there's no surprises. So if you're a business owner, you get those demos every 2 weeks to see how things are progressing with the product. You shouldn't get to the end of the product or end of the project and be surprised by what you see, right? You should know exactly what's going on, and you can provide that feedback every 2 weeks. As a development manager, those burn-up charts are very valuable to me because I can know exactly what my team's doing, how they're performing, and I can make those incremental changes along the way so I don't have this massive panic halfway through the project saying we're going to be late. I can constantly see how my teams are performing and make changes along the way. The most important thing is everyone is invested. Regardless of where they're located or what their role is in the project, they can take an active role in the success of the project. So this is a true story. We were getting close to the end of this major 2-year effort. and we realized that we're going to come up short. We have more points left than we could accomplish by our launch date. So we got all of our stakeholders together, and we explained to them the problem. They're like, hey, our launch date's coming up, and you guys want this one giant 40-point feature here, plus you want these 8 smaller features. So we either need to move out the date, or you can have this one 40-point feature, or you can have these 8 smaller features. So rather than having the finger pointing and saying, well, IT didn't do what I wanted, they did what someone else wanted, we left the decision up to them. They're invested, they're responsible for this success. So they talked about it. They actually decided to do the 8 smaller features rather than the one big feature they'd been telling us was a must-have for months. So everyone's invested. Everyone has a role in making the project successful. All right, enough about process. Let's talk about people. So once you've figured out what process you want to use, you have to have people to carry out that process. So if you're like Garmin, you have a lot of titles. But Scrum, it only has 3 roles. So how do you take those titles and map them to the roles? So I get asked a lot, who should be your Scrum Master? In my opinion, anyone can be a Scrum Master. It has nothing to do with your title or your role. So I'm a Scrum Master. I'm also a people manager. And so I get told all the time, well, you can't be a Scrum Master. Well, I'm the Scrum Master for 2 teams. To be an effective Scrum Master, you have to be able to do 3 things. First, you have to be confident in your knowledge of Scrum because you're the team's Scrum coach. You have to be able to answer their questions and help them stay on the right track. You have to be able to remove impediments. So you have to understand who to go to ask questions, who's responsible for certain systems, and how to get things moving when the team gets stuck. And I think last, and the one that's the hardest, is you have to be able to hold people accountable. You have to be able to say, hey, you're not supposed to be working on that today. You said you were going to work on this today. Or, hey, your story's been stuck in code review for 2 days. What's going on? Let's get it moving forward. So you have to be comfortable in holding people accountable to the process. All right, so product owner. So at Garmin, we've taken the responsibilities of a product owner and we split it across 3 different people. So our primary stakeholder is more of the traditional product owner. So that's the person in the business that's responsible for the business value that the team's delivering. So they're the single point of contact for the development team. They're the one going out and answering questions. Should the button be blue? Should the button be red? And if they don't know, they're responsible for going out to find the person in the business that knows the answer. Our business analysts, they're part of the IT team. They're the ones writing the stories. So our primary stakeholders, they've got other things to do. They don't have time to be in JIRA every day writing stories. So we leave that up to the business analyst. So they're authoring stories, taking questions to the primary stakeholder, documenting them back in JIRA, and really making sure that our stories are as accurate as they can be. And we can't leave out the project managers. So the project managers, they're the ones making those burn-up charts, monitoring scope, monitoring the timeline, and monitoring budget. All right, so let's talk about the Scrum team. So our Scrum teams, we basically have 3 different roles within our Scrum team. So our solution architect is basically our lead developer, and they're responsible for the technical design of the project. So they're usually working 1 or 2 sprints ahead. They don't write a lot of code. They're doing the design, they're working those spikes, and they're making sure that the developers have everything they need to keep moving. Developers, they're the one writing the code, implementing the stories. They also do the unit tests. Now our QA team, we have a separate QA team, and we have members from that QA team embedded within our Scrum teams. They are doing our functional tests, and they're doing our automation. So as you're building these teams, you have to know your people. So everyone involved must communicate, communicate, communicate. When you have teams made up of people from different countries, you have to make sure that they can understand each other, that they're willing to speak up. And the only time they interact is over a conference room phone. Sometimes it's hard to hear in the first place. So you want to make sure that the people in every location are speaking up, they're getting their questions answered to make sure that they know what they're supposed to do that day. Your team has to be willing to leave their egos at home. So some of the most effective Scrum teams, it's all about the team, not about the individual. So you want to be able to make use of that time zone difference and pass stories back and forth. So we have teams that will have a developer start on a story, hand it off to someone in Romania, they'll work on it during their day, then they'll hand it back. Or we'll have a situation where a developer in Kansas City wraps up their story, puts it in code review. The team in Romania will come in, they'll do the code review, they'll find some defects, they'll fix it, put it back in code review, get it approved, and it'll be into QA before the person in Kansas City is back in the office the next day. So it really keeps things moving. So independent spirits that can be team players. And what I mean by that is when you have the big time difference, you don't want people that need constant validation that they're doing the right thing, right? You can't hold their hand every step of the way because the person to do that may be an ocean away and 6 hours difference. So you want people that can make decisions and keep moving without people constantly confirming that they're doing the right thing. And then you're going to have to dust off the passports. Face-to-face conversation is still the best way to really build your team and have them really gel together. So we do a developer exchange program at Garmin. Every quarter we send developers one direction or the other. So we may send 3 developers from Kansas City to Romania for a week in January, and they'll really get to work there, get to know the people on the project, and then the next quarter we'll take 3 people from Romania, maybe that are on a different project, and bring them over to Kansas City. So it really helps the team get to know each other, and also it helps them be sympathetic to some of the challenges based on which office you're in. So our Romania office is very quiet, they don't get a lot of interruptions, but they're also a little disconnected. Kansas City, we get a lot of meetings, a lot of disruptions, but we also are kind of in the loop and know what's going on most of the time. So it helps you be sympathetic to each office. All right, tools. So you got your right process, you got your people. Now we need to talk about tools. All right, no surprise, we use Atlassian tools. So first let's talk about JIRA and JIRA Agile. So that's where we put our backlog, our stories, our requirements, all the details needed for that story, whether it's a link to our UX wireframes or screenshots or steps to reproduce the bug, test plans, everything the team needs to really implement that story. It also helps us with scope and with our project status. So Confluence. So Confluence is what we use for design, diagrams, documentation. Kind of touched on this already, but we keep a lot of information about the design in Confluence. It's easy to access. So if the person writing the design is in one office and the person implementing a story is in another, they can go into Confluence and reference that design, make sure that they're doing the right thing. Really helps them be self-sufficient. The other important thing we do in Confluence is meeting notes and retrospectives. So when you have people spread out all over the world, it's really hard to get everyone together for every meeting. Time zone differences just really don't allow that. So we try to document all of our meeting notes in Confluence. That's why it's easy for the people that couldn't attend the meeting to self-serve, see what was discussed, see what decisions were made, and see what action items came out of that meeting. And also, as people are coming into the project, they can maybe go through and review and see what some of the decisions are. If we have a meeting about a feature then that feature gets delayed for 6 months, that information is already in Confluence, so when we pick that feature up again, we don't have to rehash some of those decisions we've already made. They're right there and documented. So retrospectives are along the same lines. We put all the outcomes of our retrospectives in Confluence. It makes it easy to go back and see how their team's progressed over time. Maybe we have a new team member coming in and they want to see kind of what the culture of the team is. Or maybe you're a director and you want to kind of see what are some of the common complaints among all your Scrum teams. Maybe we need to look at that as a whole team to see what we can do to address that. All right, and lastly, we use Stash, Fisheye, and Crucible. So we're in the process of converting from Subversion to Stash, which if you guys have done that, that can be a pretty challenging process. So we still have some code in Subversion and some code in Stash. And so these tools are probably some of the most important that we have. When you have developers in 2 different places, there's really no way to do code reviews except with a tool like Stash or with Crucible. So developers can quickly see what's changed. They can make comments in line. They can mark things as defects. It really helps clarify whether or not a story is ready to move forward. It also helps us do code reviews much faster. All right, the last thing I want to talk to you guys about is email. So email is a great communication tool. Everyone uses it. When you have people spread out, it's the best way to get answers to your questions, especially if someone's already left for the day because they're 6 hours ahead of you. You can go in, send them an email, and they send back the information. The trick is email is not a documentation system. Emails get deleted, inboxes get lost, people leave the company. So as soon as you get the answers that you need or the information you need to document it somewhere else. Put it in JIRA, put it in Confluence, put it somewhere where the whole team can reference, see what's going on, have the information they need easily accessible. Then a last tip. So for all of my Scrum teams, I have project mailing lists. So it seems like a simple thing, but when you have people spread out, and especially in 2 different offices, it's easy for that other office to feel really disconnected. So by doing a project mailing list and emailing the whole team every single time you have a question or you need to share information, that means everyone knows what's going on. That remote team really stays engaged. They feel like they're a true part of the team. So rather than sending emails to individuals, I just shoot it out to the whole team. whoever knows the answer can answer it, and everyone gets the benefit of that knowledge. So it's just a little thing, but our remote offices are really appreciative of that when we include them in that kind of communication. All right, thanks for sticking with me. So as we discussed, at Garmin, we found that the right process plus the right tools is our recipe for a successful Scrum in the enterprise with distributed teams. So, thank you.